Sloaney, 700 WLW. So some 90 million people experienced the deep freeze. It ends sometime today. Yesterday, of course, with the wind chill, it felt like 100 million degrees below zero, so cold your skin gets frozen. If you're out in that crap yesterday like I was for about an hour, it was absolutely miserable. Frostbite, hypothermia, all those bad things. Dr. Rosemary Bates is on the show this morning to talk about this weather and your overall health. Dr. Rosemary, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
Everything is good. Not well. The wind was a little less today, but it's still like 5 below zero here in Cincinnati. And I get talking to some friends in the medical community, one specifically who works in emergency, said, yeah, we were slammed last night. Hypothermia, a little frostbite, stuff like that. People with chronic lung conditions seemingly presented a lot at ERs last night, too. So as we are told that we may see this polar vortex again sometime, before the end of winter, let's start with the most obvious one. The most deadly, is it hypothermia? Is it frostbite? What is it?
Wow, great question. So probably right off the bat, you say the most deadly. So probably that's hypothermia. It's what you think of as hypothermia. So frostbite is basically a freezing of the skin in exposed areas, and I can say how that happens. And then hypothermia is actually when your core body temperature falls. You know, normal being about 98.6, and if it's below 95, we call that hypothermia, and that is, in fact, a reason to seek medical treatment.
How would I know if I'm hypothermic or someone near me is? What are the warning signs?
Yeah, great question. So one of the very first things we do to warm, actually, as we get cold, so as we get cold, we try to, our bodies, incredible things, they do anything to keep your core temperature warm. Mm-hmm. So that includes decreasing the circulation to the hands, the face, the feet, legs, which is how you can get frostbite on the skin. But then eventually that core body temperature is going to start dropping. So one of the first things we do is we shiver. We actually start shivering. But then things like, they call them the umbles, the grumbles, the mumbles, and it really starts to affect both your brain and your body. So your coordination as far as stumbling and so forth. And then your brain, which is kind of then the double whammy, it's starting to get confused. And they're not necessarily making rational decisions. So again, somebody starts with the shivering, they're trying to get warm, and then starts, to be somewhat irrational. And again, it affects your brain as well.
There have been some cases where people they've been found dead, obviously, in weather like this, with their clothes completely off. As they get so confused, I'm guessing, because of what you just described, Dr. Bates, is that they think they're hot and they're not.
That's exactly right. And in fact, and certainly you can do that, and you can actually experience a warm feeling, sort of a warm feeling. But then, just like you say, much like the sort of the bends when if you exit water from a low level, too quickly, scuba diving you're exactly right. It affects the brain. So, you lose direction and so forth, and then you lose your sense. It sort of sends you into a sense of delirium. Another time you obviously see that is in the very elderly and the young are much more, they're more vulnerable to that, and they already are not able to make good decisions. They don't necessarily feel it the same as we do.
Yeah, as far as first aid for that goes, you recognize the warning signs if you're working with someone or loved one, whatever, and they start to experience having the mumbles and hey, what's wrong with you? I can't understand it. And you've been outside in this kind of cold weather. What's the treatment?
So I would say, okay, so number one is, the same as prevention is get inside. I mean, obviously try and limit. You said you were out for an hour yesterday, but try and limit your exposure outside. Another massive thing is layering. I mean, absolutely layering up. We think about sort of 3 layers. The layer nearest your skin, not cotton, but poly, those kinds of things. And you're trying to create a dry, sort of a wicking thing. You do not want to be wet, next to the body. And again, cotton tends to hold moisture. Then a layer of either fleece, wool, something that's more insulating, and then something over the top, preferably that's breathable, but it's going to keep out the elements and so forth. So somebody starts to show those symptoms again, try and get them inside. Add another layer, and if somebody's in wet clothes, that's got to come off. So the idea is to try and keep dry. That's really, really important. And again, get out the elements.
Do you want to get if you feel like you're like that and you're compromised, do you want to get in a hot bath or something along those lines to warm yourself up?
So I think you've got to be careful. So you've got to be very careful. And certainly if you're concerned about frostbite, you have to be careful about sun warming. Another thing, if you've lost some of your skin sensation, if you think about it, you're not necessarily a good judge of how hot water is. So I would say to do that with caution. But obviously, in a milder sense, you're cold. There's nothing wrong with, again, warm water. You've got to make sure that you can perceive the difference between warm and so forth. If you have, red, sort of tingly, cold skin, that's one thing. We call that maybe frostnip. But if you've got actually the stage of frostbite where you've lost some color and maybe it starts to be a little bit more sticky, there's no rewarming there. You need to seek medical attention for that. You can blister and eventually, lose limbs. The circulation is very, very compromised and you can end up losing limbs. You have to be very cautious about that. And again, about your perception of the temperature of water and so forth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. If you're out in this stuff, you can't try to warm up too quickly. I guess that's counterintuitive. Or if you're someone, you can body heat is a great thing too. Believe it or not, you just wrap yourselves in a blanket, and your body heat will help them get back to where they need to be. Dr. Rosemary Bates is on the show this morning on 700 WLW talking about emergency medicine in this kind of weather because last 2 days, and it looks like even though we're going to warm up this weekend. I saw a report yesterday. It said we may be back in the deep freeze again sometime soon. So forewarned, forearmed. That's hypothermia, which is the big killer here, too. Frostbite's another interesting one because, man, I'll tell you what, normally you have it hurts like today, for example. I had cracked the window down for a minute just because I know I was going to talk to you. And I could hold my hand outside driving for, I don't know, maybe about 30 seconds before it felt like I was getting stung by bees. Your body is telling you that there's going to be a problem if you keep this up.
That's exactly right. Yeah, when you say, and of course, and to some extent, like with lots of things, is when you feel it, it's still good. It's when you stop feeling those sensations that you really got a problem. But like you say, when the temperatures are that cold, it can happen very, very quickly. And again, what our body does when faced with cold is it does everything to maintain a core temperature. So it diverts sort of the blood. Your vessels constrict, they get smaller, and it's diverting it from the face, the arms, the legs, the hands, the extremities. So we're more vulnerable there. And like you say, at first you might get sort of even that warm feeling, then the tingling, and then you move on. It might be pink, red. We call that frostnip. And then you start to get decreased color, decreased sensation, numbness, all that sort of, tingling, stinging, burning. None of those things are good.
What about lung issues, too? If you suffer from asthma, the elderly, obviously, the very young, too, that's a very real concern is going out in this kind of weather and in breathing it in. What does that do to your lungs?
Yeah, so first of all, actually, on that note, which is interesting, if you have any kind of condition, you're breathing more, you're exerting yourself, you actually you're losing water vapor, first of all, and dehydration is one of the things that will make all of these situations worse if you're dehydrated. And you're losing quite a lot of heat. But otherwise, there's a lot of lung conditions that are very sensitive to the cold. We get the bronchoconstriction, your airways kind of constrict like an asthma sort of thing to the cold. That is a very, very common reaction. So, often people with chronic lung diseases do not do well, not in any extremes of temperature, actually.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense too, because you're kind of like freezing your lungs from the inside because it's warm and it's moist, and that stuff's going to freeze as well too. The colder it is, the more the cold air can come into your lungs. And does the when you breathe the air in, Doc? That's a good question too. Is the air obviously warms as it comes in through my mouth, right? Can it be so cold as that it literally freezes my lungs on contact? Have we gotten to a point like that?
You know what? I am not aware of that, no. But again, some of these temperatures, I think I've seen where they've been in the 80s or the 90s. Some of these things are almost unprecedented. Where did I read it was going to be colder in some parts of the United States of America than it was in Antarctica. So I'm not aware of breathing. But you can feel that sensation when your nose has. Yeah. When your nose has this. I think that there's probably enough space, next to your core, if you will, your center between when you're going to get the air into your lungs, that's sort of central enough. But certainly in the extremities, like I say, in the nose and so forth, is where, again, the circulation is pulled away from there. That's where you're most exposed and have a much greater risk of things freezing.
Yeah, get some. That's why you'd wear a scarf or something around your face and breathe through your nose, not your mouth, because you want that air as warm as possible by the time it does hit your lungs. I heard stories too that there are people, depending on the medication, you should not be out in this kind of cold.
So there are medications, some antidepressants, there are medical conditions, and all of those things that make you a lot more sensitive. Again, we sort of said the elderly, the very young, infants, and children that have a different body surface area, as well as those two groups not being able to acknowledge and perceive being cold as well. But yeah, some medications can make you more sensitive. Medical conditions like diabetes, those people, sometimes you already have a loss of sensation.
Okay.
And so they don't perceive, again, because some of this is understanding, perceiving that something is getting cold, you're getting cold, and then doing something to correct it. So yeah, there are definitely some medications that make.
Well, what is it about the antidepressants? That's a big one because a lot of my audience have some mental issues.
And there you go. You know what? You've got me. You've actually got me. I'm not actually sure what it is that make people more susceptible. Again, there's certainly medical conditions that can do it, and some of that is underactive thyroid, nutrition issues, diabetes, some of those severe arthritis. Yeah, actually, in some of them, they change your body's ability to regulate the temperature. Again, the antidepressants, antipsychotics, some pain meds, and sedatives. And again, some of that is it's a dysregulation of being able to control your body temperature. And the other thing is that it's affecting the way that how you perceive how cold you really are. Like as in a kiddo, like in a child, and some in the elderly.
Yeah, it makes sense. Dr. Rosemary Bates here in Cincinnati. Appreciate the time, Doc. Thanks for the insight and all the info we need to not die out in this cold weather and the preceding cold weather that's going to come in the next couple of weeks, too. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too. There you go. Stay warm, and now you know everything you need. I don't know what it's about antidepressants. I wonder if it gives you that, when you start to get in the hypothermic mode, if that causes you to detach from reality. I have no idea. If the doctor doesn't know, damn it, I don't know. Anyway, we get a timeout in. We've got news on the way in a few here as the temperatures finally start to warm up. Details coming up. 700 WLW.